This is video number 1 in a series looking at every year in Britain from 1960 onwards, at least to the year 1990 or maybe 2000. I don't know, we'll see how it goes. I'll be delving into a bit of everything, so plenty of nostalgic memories for you all. Let's get straight into it. Music, TV, media, the arts, etc. The 5th Eurovision Song Contest was held in London at the Royal Festival Hall. The United Kingdom did well that year, coming second out of 13 entries. The contest was won by the entry from France, sung by Jacqueline Boyer. The music charts were still dominated by acts such as Elvis Presley, Cliff Richard and the Shadows and the Everly Brothers, with It's Now or Never by Elvis being the biggest selling single of the year. The 60s weren't really swinging yet, unless we're talking about Elvis's hips. The biggest selling album of the year was the soundtrack to the stage musical South Pacific. Soundtrack albums from musicals were very often the biggest sellers in the late 50s and early 60s. Other popular songs you might remember from 1960 include My Old Man's a Dustman by Lonnie Donegan, Cathy's Clown from the Everly Brothers, and Only the Lonely by Roy Orbison. The stage musical Oliver also premiered that year. Seemingly, it was in August 1960 that the Beatles first performed as the Beatles in Hamburg. They'd used a variety of names previously, but that's proved hard to confirm for sure. The rest, as they say, is history. I think we'll hear a lot about those young men in this video series. As for the Gogglebox, there were still only 2 channels at this point. Remember fiddling with those rabbit ears type aerials, trying to get a decent picture? Apparently around 2/3 of homes in Britain had a telly by 1960. That seems a bit high to me. Can you remember when your family joined the TV revolution? I do remember getting our first colour set around 1975. At the end of the year, the first ever episode of Coronation Street was broadcast, introducing characters such as Ken Barlow, who is still in Corrie 65 years later. Several other characters featured in that first episode would also become household names, such as Elsie Tanner, Annie Walker and Albert Tatlock. Absolutely mind-blowing that the show is still going strong. I was an avid watcher from the late 70s to around the mid or maybe late 1990s. Landmark kitchen sink drama Saturday Night and Sunday Morning debuted at the cinema this year. The film, based on a novel by Alan Sillitoe, was a big box office success. The British Film Institute named Saturday Night and Sunday Morning as the 14th greatest British film of all time on its list of the top 100 British films. You'd probably have paid about 13 old pence to get into the pictures that year. Remember, the new decimal system we use now was still more than 10 years away, but that would be about equivalent to 5p in decimal coinage. The Lady Chatterley trial ended in November 1960 after the jury deliberated for only a few hours. The full version of Lady Chatterley's Lover was effectively banned in the UK for decades. The prosecution had argued Penguin's uncensored edition was obscene, but the defence leaned hard on the new Obscene Publications Act of 1959 provision that a work could be allowed if it was in the public good because of its literary, artistic or educational merit. The outcome allowed the publishers to sell the book legally, and it very quickly became a mass market talking point rather than a whispered about forbidden novel. Naturally, sales of the novel rocketed after the verdict, as everyone flocked to read the dirty bits. The case is often treated as a turning point in British cultural life. The trial helped establish that courts should look at a book as a whole, and that serious literary evidence could matter in judging obscenity, rather than just shocking passages taken in isolation. It became one of those early 60s moments that signalled Britain and its people were changing, whether everyone liked it or not. football and other sports. In England, the top league was won by Burnley, with the FA Cup heading to the Black Country on the Wolverhampton Wanderers team bus after they beat Blackburn Rovers in the final. In Scotland, the top league was won by Heart of Midlothian. The top leagues in both England and Scotland have changed official names several times, so I'll frequently just refer to them as the top league in these videos. Rangers defeated Kilmarnock to win the Scottish FA Cup. Hampden Park in Glasgow that year also hosted one of the most famous matches in European Cup history, with Real Madrid putting 7 past Eintracht Frankfurt in front of an incredible 127,000 spectators. Final score: Real 7, Eintracht Frankfurt 3, including 2 hat-tricks for Real. The Summer Olympics were held in Rome, with Great Britain bringing home a respectable total of 20 medals. We didn't do quite so well at the Winter Olympics in California. Yeah, we'll move quickly on. Closer to home, the Grand National at Aintree was televised for the first time. That's been a big annual event since 1839, bringing out all the amateur tipsters. Toys, crazes and fashions. Dr. Martens 1460 boots first arrived on the scene in 1960. That iconic 1460 style 8-holers named after the date of their inception, the 1st of the 4th, 1960, with the cushioned airwear soles, the yellow stitching and the grooved edge to the soles. They're a heck of a price nowadays, but you get what you pay for. Proudly made in Britain, they have outlasted many other fashion trends that have come and gone, but DMs are still here. Murder when they were new though, weren't they? Until they got worn in a bit. The beehive hairstyle also showed up that year. If you're old enough, did you have a beehive? Maybe your mum or granny had one. Brought back on trend again decades later by the late Amy Winehouse, of course. And on the dance floors in this country, everyone was doing the twist after Chubby Checker reached number 1 on the US Billboard Hot 100 in September 1960. The Barbie doll, though launched in 1959, quickly became the must-have doll for British girls in 1960. She's still going strong, just nobody mentioned that 1997 song. The Brighton Toy Fair allowed imported toys to be shown for the first time, which meant the arrival of Lego, probably one of the most popular toys of all time, and educational too. Etch-a-Sketch was another popular toy with both boys and girls which was first sold that year. I had an Etch-a-Sketch, but could never master drawing anything particularly complex. 1960 saw the introduction of the Skeletrix catalogue, which has been issued annually ever since, with the first editions now extremely rare and presumably valuable. It was 1960 they switched to plastic-bodied cars from the tin plate they used before. Skeletrix. I spent more time putting my cars back on the track after they'd flown off at the corners. For the serious model maker, the Airfix magazine launched that year. I used to love making those kits back in the early 80s. Cars and motoring. The post-war rise of the motor car brought inevitable change to Britain's roads, especially in the big cities. Double yellow lines and parking meters were both first introduced in the UK during the 1950s, followed by the first traffic wardens appearing on the streets of London in 1960. Hundreds of motorists were caught out on that first day in September. It was also the year that taking your car for its MOT became a thing. Initially, it was only for cars that were at least 10 years old, which does seem pretty generous. It would be 1967 before it was changed to a legal requirement for 3-year-old cars, as it is currently. The 1960 test would set you back 14 shillings in old money, plus an extra shilling for the certificate. Cheek! Those early tests were pretty basic. Did you know the 3 triangles of the logo represented the original 3 items tested? brakes, steering and lights. The British Motor Corporation debuted the minivan in 1960, basically a van version of their iconic car. The minivan was the ideal vehicle for the small tradesperson. It remained in production for nearly 25 years. Boy, did we produce some classic looking vehicles back then. I'd love a wee minivan now, perfect for loading up after a trip to B&Q. Politics, current affairs and other events. 1960 got off to a bang, literally, with a mass shooting in Sheffield on New Year's Day at the East House pub. 3 men were shot and killed, with another 2 wounded. The killer was a Somali national. On the 3rd of February 1960, Tory Prime Minister Harold Macmillan addressed South Africa's Parliament in Cape Town and made his famous Wind of Change speech, delivering the phrase that became the headline for a whole era. The wind of change is blowing through this continent. His point was clear. African nationalism and independence movements were unstoppable, and Britain needed to recognise that the old imperial order was shifting fast. He also framed it through a Cold War lens, warning that the new nations of Africa and Asia could be pulled towards East or West, making this a contest for influence as much as politics. It's often seen as a turning point, a senior British Conservative leader openly acknowledging that decolonisation was the direction of travel and the 1960s were going to look very different from the 1950s. The UK became one of the founding members of the European Free Trade Association, EFTA. In January 1960, the UK signed the Stockholm Convention alongside Austria, Denmark, Norway, Portugal, Sweden and Switzerland, the so-called Outer Seven. EFTA's big idea was straightforward: free trade between members, especially in industrial goods, without the deeper political integration that came with the newer European Economic Community. The convention entered into force on the 3rd of May 1960, and for a while it was a major alternative European trade bloc until the UK's priorities shifted and it eventually left EFTA when it joined the EEC in 1973. There was more tragedy in March in what became Britain's worst peacetime fire services disaster. The fire at a Whisky Bond warehouse in Anderston, Glasgow, caused the death of 14 firemen and 5 crew from Glasgow Salvage Corps. It's said that 450 firefighters fought the blaze, along with every fire engine in the city. 60,000 people protested against nuclear weapons at a gathering in Trafalgar Square in central London. Organisers claimed the crowd reached 100,000, but whatever the true figure, it was the largest demonstration London had seen that century by that year. The end of the year marked the end of national service call-ups, although the last national serviceman only left in May 1963. 2.3 million young men had done their national service since 1947 and its eventual end in 1963. Should we bring it back in some form? Inflation had taken its relentless toll on one of our old coins in the 1950s, the farthing valued at a quarter of a penny, whose name derived from the Old English for a fourth part. Demand for the coin was dwindling, and production had actually stopped in 1956. One newspaper vendor reportedly became abusive when offered 6 farthings for a newspaper, despite it still being legal tender up to 1 shilling. The last day of 1960 marked the end of the farthing as legal tender. You'd have to be a fair age to be watching this if you can remember the farthing. Just a little reminder that in 1960 the Cold War was very much on. Britain launched its first nuclear-powered submarine, the HMS Dreadnought, that year. Births, deaths and marriages. Let's look at some notable people who were born or died in 1960. Births. Prince Andrew. Sorry, I should use his new name. Persona non grata. was probably the most notable birth this year. Nigella Lawson, Winford Christie, Jeremy Clarkson and Private Eye editor Ian Hislop were also born in 1960. Presenter of the tea time quiz The Chase on ITV, Bradley Walsh, and chaser Sean Wallace were born 2 days apart this year too. Deaths. Aneurin Bevan, noted for spearheading the creation of the British National Health Service during his tenure as Minister of Health in Clement Attlee's government, died in July 1960 at the age of 62. American rock and roller Eddie Cochran died in a car accident aged just 21 whilst touring the UK. He was travelling in a taxi after a gig when the driver, who was reportedly speeding, lost control and crashed. Marriages. Princess Margaret married Anthony Armstrong Jones, a commoner no less, in May at Westminster Abbey. It was the first royal wedding to be shown on television. Price tracking. Every year we'll take a look at some average prices for everyday things, starting from 1960. This type of price comparison going back decades is notoriously difficult, as things have changed so much. But things like petrol and the cost of a telly licence can be tracked fairly reasonably anyway. I hope you might find them interesting. Note, all amounts are in the pre-decimal system. The decimal equivalents are shown on screen in red. Remember, there were 12 old pennies in a shilling and 20 shillings or 240 pence in £1. A man's average full-time wage for a week was around £14, 2 shillings and 1 pence. The basic state pension for a single person was 50 shillings for a week. A gallon of petrol was around 56 old pence. A pint of beer in a bar was around 1 shilling and 10 pence. And a loaf of bread, a typical white sliced loaf, would have set you back a shilling. A TV licence was £4, and to post a letter, it would have cost you 3 pence. The average UK house price was around £2,260. And to get into the cinema would have cost you around 13 old pence. A pint of milk was around 8 pence, and a packet of butter, roughly equivalent to 250 grams, was around 21 pence. A kilowatt of electricity was around just under 2 pence. And vehicle excise duty, also known as road tax, was £12 and 10 shillings. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little look back at 1960. Subscribe now if you would like to follow this nostalgic trip through life in Britain, warts and all. As always, YouTube will select a couple of videos you might want to watch next. I try to upload one new video each week. If you are old enough to remember 1960, let everyone know in the comments what your memories are, good or bad.